I could tell you, Gil is just about worth the price of the ticket coming here. I love Gil. He's funny. How about having the President of the United States in the same room with you this morning? Just a word of appreciation for our millennials. There was a couple of rows up from my wife and I, and they stood up while the President was speaking and actually took a selfie with the President on screen behind them. Have the President of the United States photobomb your picture while you're here at Values Voters. That's brilliant. I would never have thought of that. Well, I'm appreciative of the opportunity to speak to you at a gathering like this. Most of us, I think probably all of us, have a fairly clear understanding of the Founding Fathers' vision for our republic. It was anchored in the concept of natural law and natural rights. Itself rooted in the Judeo-Christian worldview. I'm pretty sure most of you know this. And this foundation was evidenced by, I think, one of the most famous sentiments in all of human history, when Thomas Jefferson declared in the Declaration of Independence that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those kinds of concepts had never before been uttered in the foundation of a government. And they were at the founding of our nation. What if I told you, though, that some people in our nation have also thought about what our founders built and rejected it? These people also had a vision and overthrew that of the founders, determined to reformulate America as a humanistic enterprise, and they never asked anyone's permission to do it. So let me present their alternative vision for America. It is a nation where there are no rights for men and women, except insofar as the government grants them and allows you to keep them, where our government will be run more and more by well-meaning administrators and less by meddlesome voters like you, who will learn to be docile and acquiescent and live in a vast collective, with the government creating individuals and shepherding them throughout their lives, while making sure that individualism and patriotism do not interfere. That is the vision of the prophets of the secular movement, the secular progressive movement, in their own words, as I hope to share with you today. Now, beginning in the late 1880s and the early 1900s, the progressives started this work, and they literally ridiculed the ideas of natural law and even human nature. Gone was the idea of the laws of nature and nature's God from the Declaration of Independence. Instead, progressives insisted human beings had no nature. They are born as blank slates or empty vessels. John Dewey, who many believe was the most influential progressive, certainly had a huge impact on our public school system, said this, quote, "Social arrangements, laws, institutions are means of creating individuals. Individuality in a social and moral sense is something to be worked out or wrought out." Well, how do human beings become what they ultimately are, according to progressives? Well, their cultural and historical surroundings create them. This is what John Dewey and others believed. For progressives like Dewey, government would become the ideal incubator and director of human nature. It can and must control more and more of human existence if government is to create individuals and even work out their morality. After all, as you've heard, it takes a village to raise a child. Now, that's quite a lot for a government to bite off, don't you think? If progressives see government as an overarching human institution filled with experts shepherding people like yourselves, then what about the founders' concept of we the people? Well, I prefer to let progressives answer for themselves. In 1887, when Woodrow Wilson was a professor, he went on to become a president, he complained that America's future success was, quote, made doubtful by that besetting error of ours, the error of trying to do too much by vote, end quote. Instead, Woodrow Wilson praised the European style of governance by administrators, and he noted with satisfaction that that continent's citizens could, quote, be expected to be very docile and acquiescent in learning what things they don't have a right to think and speak about with authority, end quote. Americans, on the other hand, he said, tended to be meddlesome. He actually used that word. I guess we voters tend to stick our noses where they don't belong. Progressives don't like that. Speaking figuratively of the government, Wilson said, quote, excuse me, "The cook must be trusted with a large discretion as to the management of the fires and the ovens," end quote. Now, I don't know about you, but the bigger government gets, the less I trust it, especially when they have me and my family being eyeballed as the main course. I don't trust government. I don't trust people who aggregate power to themselves. In a 1912 presidential campaign speech, Wilson, who was then the governor of New Jersey, described the process by which he expected America to be transformed. He likened the activity of a beneficent government working to fashion society to a crew that homeowners hired to renovate their home. He said the architects would work gradually and patiently on the alterations to the home, and then Wilson declared, until finally, quote, "A generation or two from now, the scaffolding will be taken away, and there will be the family in a great building whose noble architecture will at last be disclosed, where men can live as a single community, cooperative as in a perfected and coordinated beehive," close quote. Would you like to live in a beehive, even if it was coordinated? When Woodrow Wilson dreamt aloud of a perfected, coordinated beehive, he wasn't speaking hyperbolically. One of the pioneers, the formative pioneers of the progressive movement, John Burgess, he was a law professor for Columbia University. He was one of the founders of the discipline of political science in the United States. In 1890, he wrote that the purpose of the state was, quote, "the perfection of humanity, the civilization of the world, the perfect development of the human reason, and its attainment to universal command over individualism," end quote. Well, you can't have individuals mucking up the beehive, according to progressives. And this process of perfecting man would not occur overnight. According to one influential progressive, Charles Merriam, he was a professor of political science at the University of Chicago. He actually became an advisor to several U.S. presidents, including Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Merriam admitted that this perfection of humanity awaited the coming of the universal state. This is kind of a startling quote. It begins this way: "This end, the perfection of humanity, can be realized, however, only when a world state is organized, and for this mankind is not yet ready," end quote. Now, Christians who have even a superficial understanding of what the Bible says is coming in the last days should feel a shiver run up your spine when you hear words like that. And it is clear to this day, whether you're talking about climate change or anything else, that progressives still believe in the globalist vision of a transnational superstate. Now, meanwhile, back in the good old USA, how could the government accomplish such a renovation? Well, obviously, if government is to refashion human society, then that government must of necessity be unlimited. You hear this all the time. Excuse me. Matthew Spalding of Hillsdale College notes this distinction between our founders and progressives. He said the founders believed in separation of powers, which divided and checked the government. Progressives believe in a combination of powers, which would concentrate its authority and direct its actions. If you're going to create individuals from start to finish, you hear these kinds of pushes constantly. Anything from kindergarten that begins at 2 and 3 years old to schools that can take your children to your daughters to get an abortion without parental consent. We see this over and over and over again. The experts will decide, the experts will create your children. They will shepherd them from start to finish. You have to have this combination of powers. Charles Merriam said that there really is no line that the state cannot cross. He says, quote, "It is not admitted that there are no limits to the action of the state, but on the other hand, it is fully conceded that there are no natural rights which bar the way," end quote. I'd like to think, and I think our president does as well, that there are limits to government power. We just have to stand up for it. Now, some have used the word Leviathan to describe the all-powerful state, which protects and nurtures man. Thomas Hobbes famously used it this way. Many Bible commentators use the image of the dragon Leviathan in a different way, as a symbol of great political powers organized against God or his people. There is no doubt that there is some truth in Hobbes' view. Government power can be put to constructive use. The Apostle Paul in Romans 13 talks about the fact that God establishes government in order to hinder the spread of evil and to promote good. But our founders understood the warning of Scripture too, that when power is concentrated in the hands of small groups of people, it becomes an oligarchy. It becomes the Bible's Leviathan. Now, in 1938, as the rise of a Nazified Germany cast its shadow across Europe, a German political theorist named Carl Schmitt examined this symbol of Leviathan and approved of it. This is what he said, quote, "Hobbes' Leviathan is the mortal god who brings to man peace and security. Because of this, Leviathan demands unconditional obedience. There exists no right of resistance to him, neither by invoking a higher nor a different right, nor by invoking religious reasons and arguments. He alone punishes and rewards. Based on his sovereign power, Leviathan alone determines by law, in questions of justice, what is right and proper, and, in matters pertaining to religious beliefs, what is truth and error." Close quote. You hear the echoes of these kinds of sentiments when the Supreme Court dismisses arguments about marriage, for example, just simply because there may be religious reasons attached to it. This is an abomination. To call forth Leviathan is to call forth a mythical monster which cannot be recalled and which destroys all in its reach. This was a danger that our founding fathers recognized, and they warned us against it. You know, one only has to remember, for example, that American children used to be allowed to pray in schools or see the Ten Commandments posted on the hallway walls. Nativity scenes were common on public grounds during Christmas. High school football games began with an opening prayer. Well, what happened? Didn't the founding fathers state clearly that religious expression could not be infringed by the government? Well, because progressive ideas had so permeated the nation's law schools in the first half of the 20th century, the U.S. Supreme Court by mid-century had no problem dispensing with these quote-unquote natural rights. Without a single precedent, oftentimes, the High Court created new standards by which it would begin the process of altering the free exercise of religion. Leviathan had simply decreed that it would be so. There is only one course of action for people who do not wish to grant to Leviathan such all-encompassing power, and that is to do something. Don't sit still. Let every school board demand that children be taught the views of the founding fathers. Let every parent educate their children in the principles of liberty. In George Washington's first inaugural address, that titan of liberty said that the preservation of the sacred fire of liberty and the destiny of the Republican model of government has been ultimately staked on the experiment entrusted to the hands of the American people. It seems to me that in protecting this republic, George Washington was looking to us as much as we look to him. And I say to you, it is time for Leviathan once more to be put in chains. Thank you, and God bless you.